Business is simple. It's just not easy. We focus on three things to help you run and grow your business more easily: talent, sales, and how to scale. This is the Talent, Sales, and Scale Show. Hey everyone, Bryan Whittington with this episode of the Talent, Sales, and Scale Show. We have Mike O'Kelly. You got to check him out online, for goodness sakes, on the video, because he's got some stuff everywhere. He's sharing with me his swag tactics, doing a little guerrilla marketing, so loving it. Today, we're going to take a little bit of a left turn or right turn, depending on how you look at it. And we're going to be talking about outside sales, something we really haven't talked about a lot and almost looked as a redheaded stepchild, one might say, right now with everybody in the lockdown, and we couldn't do it. And everyone's like, oh, outside sales is dead. Mike is going to suggest that no, it's not. So the topic today is Mike O'Kelly is going to share with us how not only to survive but thrive in outside sales. So with that said, welcome to the show, Mike.
Thank you, Bryan. I really appreciate it. Very excited to be here. This is one of my favorite podcasts. It's now in my rotation about 5 to 6. So very thrilled to participate and share with your audience.
Well, really happy to be here and that you're here. And the cool thing is, although Mike is doing outside sales, he grew up in it. He cut his teeth there and he's really passionate about it. He's also founder of Rithm AI, and it's a pretty cool tool that if you are in outside sales, definitely check it out. He's also the host of Survive Outside Sales podcast, so we're going to be riffing on that a little bit as well. So other than that, so you're a co-founder, you have this really cool technology, and so what? You have a podcast. Why should we listen to you as being an expert on outside sales?
Well, I appreciate that. And it's a great question. So one of the reasons why I guess you can consider me an expert is because I have failed and failed and failed. And I've learned from every one of those failures. And if you've been in an industry for 20 years with success, you're going to realize failure is part of that. And so I'm a completely honest person. If anybody's listened to my podcast, I tell them, I have failed. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Everyone does. The ones that tell you they haven't, the ones that say they've just knocked it out of the park every single time, every single year, are just lying to you, because nobody is that great. Nobody is that perfect. And you're always going to kind of rise to your level of incompetence, no matter what you're doing. And then you have to retrain yourself, and then you have to learn new processes. And so I have spent 20 years in sales, mostly in medical and pharma, but I started off with Enterprise Rent-A-Car and their management training program, which was
a great management training program, by the way.
Absolutely. And I learned more in the 4 years there than I probably did in the next 10 in the medical pharma space, as far as sales training, as far as business acumen, et cetera. So it really set me up for success. So if you're listening right now, one of the things I recommend you do is go find a company that has outstanding training. And there are some in the medical pharmaceutical space, but what I find is a lot of the B2B, the places where you have to cut your teeth, the copier sales, payroll sales, the enterprises of the world, uniform sales, anywhere where you have to go and you do a lot of pounding the pavement and you don't know exactly where you're going and you deal with a lot of interactions and customers. I don't know how many sales interactions I've had, but I definitely know it's more than the 10,000 hours for expertise that Malcolm Gladwell talks about in his book Outliers, which is one of my favorite books. He's one of my favorite authors. If you're not familiar with Malcolm Gladwell, I don't think there's a terrible read in any of his books. My favorite is Outliers, but I also like Blink. There's a couple others that are very interesting. Back on topic, I think one of the things that I also have been very fortunate is I've had good mentors. And so I've learned from some of the best. And then what I did was I partnered with them. So my partner, who I think should be on the show as well, Bryan, in the future, he is, I call him the sales ninja, because I'm more of a big thinker, process, building a system. And he can walk in and analyze things so quickly and he's a machine. I've been on calls with him, and usually within 2 to 3 questions, he's getting his prospects to agree with him and buying, which, I'm more conversational. I like to sit down and kind of know about the past, the present, and the future. And he just can figure out without being sleazy. Like there's no shtick. It's just, he's an unbelievable listener. He's rehearsed and practiced 10 to 15,000 times. And so he's kind of taught me what I was lacking. And so, going back to your original point, I don't know if I'd consider myself an expert because perhaps because I'm still learning. I believe that there's still knowledge that can be learned every day, but I do understand as far as, when people say you're an expert because you've done X, Y, or Z, I do understand. So I guess in some regards, I feel like I am an expert because I've gone through the battles, I've failed, I've won. But on the other hand, I feel like I've got so much more to learn, but I've also got so much more to give back to the sales community.
Yeah, it's kind of curious. The more you learn, the more you feel like a failure because you realize how much there is still yet to learn. I got just a quick aside. Yeah. I was on a peer group the other day, and I'm pretty decent at sales. I think I'm pretty decent. And I had a different methodology of taking this framework through. And this guy like just lambasted me about some of the questions I was asking. So I don't care how good you think you are, you're going to get humbled pretty darn quickly. Now, I would like to hit this. So we've talked about failure and learning from your failures in the past. So I'm not going to bring that up too deeply. I'm not going to go down that path. However, just realize that the biggest lessons that you're going to learn come from your failures. And if you haven't failed, you haven't tried hard enough. So make sure that you go out and fail, suck your thumb a couple of minutes, get over it, and then get back in the game. Other people won't survive it, and that's what's going to set you apart. So get out and fail. But I did want to talk about the training that you brought up, but you went through enterprise. And you went down a path in outside sales, and I hadn't considered that really in a while. The enterprises of the world, the ADPs, the Xeroxes, right? They were really, the IBMs, they were really well known for their training. And I think a lot of organizations have gotten away from that. And what you said is find an organization where you're going to do that. Think of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki. He suggested back in the day, get into a, what do they call that? Multi-level marketing type of thing, just to get some training, because they had that. Better if you can get into an enterprise, because it's pretty lucrative. Now, that said, the path to outside sales versus inside sales, that's a pretty big divergence there, because what you start with really sets you up from a career standpoint. What I'm finding a lot of is right now people are reaching out to me. They're in more of I'll call it a mature market. And they're saying, hey, Bryan, I really want to get into SaaS sales or technology sales. And they don't have any of that enterprise type sales, not enterprise, the car company, but enterprise type complex sales. What would you say to that person? Why would one person maybe choose outside sales as opposed to inside sales? I'll start with that, and I'll have a couple of follow-up.
Great question. And so that option was never one for me. Actually, I take that back. I did. So let me go back to the beginning. I'll answer the question by telling a story. So I played minor league baseball for 2 years, and 1 year in the Atlanta Braves organization. They're one of their A-ball minor league, and they fired me. So I've been fired by the Atlanta Braves. And so I kind of wear it as a badge of honor, but I say it was the greatest summer of my life. And so when I was done, I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. Baseball had been everything. And so when people say, where'd you go to college? I said, I went to William & Mary. And they said, what'd you study? And I said, baseball. I minored in sociology. My first passion was drawing and architecture when I was younger, but all the schools that had architecture that were good baseball schools, like the NC States, Clemson's, some of the bigger ACC schools, they weren't recruiting me. And so I went to a small liberal arts school that was very limited on what you could do for school. And so I really wasn't exposed to anything in college that I was interested in. And so my dad was in pharmaceutical sales, and I asked him, should I get in pharmaceutical sales? He goes, absolutely not. He says,
what year was this? Because there was a major shift in around early 2000s that made pharmaceutical sales not as lucrative.
Yeah, this was around that, because I graduated in 2001. So I'm in my 40s. And so my dad was on the tail end of his career. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, the industry is less about relationships with physicians and more about the bigger companies having television commercials. And I think some legislature changed where there wasn't always every commercial on TV was a pharmaceutical ad.
Right.
It used to be my dad would go and sit, and he sold to cardiologists, and it's one of the hardest to sell to. You're talking about the heart. And they would sit down and they would have peer-like discussions, even though my dad was not a physician, but he was highly trained in the science and could answer any scientific question because my dad was literally studying nonstop when a new drug came out. I mean, at night, he was pouring through medical journals so that he could talk to cardiologists. Now in the pharmaceutical world, what they look for are people with backgrounds like enterprise, because they want people that are already trained, so they don't have to do that. They don't have to spend the resources and the time. Because the companies that the last 3 medical companies that I worked for, I appreciate the opportunity that they gave me, but none of those companies invited me to the corporate office for training because I was hired, quote unquote, in between training sessions. They said, well, we'll get you in the next training class, which never happened. So basically, I was pushed out into the field with my last 3 medical companies without going to the home office. I still to this day don't know what 2 of the home offices look like. I did go to a national sales meeting where I saw one of the home offices, but they basically send you like everything digitally. And I'm hearing a lot of companies are doing that now. And so that's one of the things that has really changed in outside sales, is the training is just now more virtual. It's kind of, you do the training at home, your manager will come out and do maybe some role play. They'll maybe do like a day in the hotel lobby, and then you're out in the field. And then we'll bring you in later, which I don't think is really going to set people up for success. But going back to the topic and the question was, I went on some job interviews while I was bartending in the off seasons. And so I was done with baseball. I'd been released from 3 teams after 2 years, and I was just done. I was like, I don't want to be Crash Davis from Bull Durham and just play in the minor leagues until I was 35 and 40 years old. I didn't think it was going to happen. My goal is to get to the big leagues. I didn't see a path to get there. And so I hung up the cleats and hung up the spikes. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And so I looked in the Charlotte Observer and the classified ads. That shows you how things have changed dramatically, because I'm only in my early 40s. But yet when I was looking for jobs, I was looking in the newspaper. Yep. And there were some inside sales jobs, et cetera. And when I went to them, you know, Bryan, I just didn't feel like it was me. I'm an outdoors guy. I'm an athlete. I played on grass. You know, I had the sun on my face. I was used to that. And so I think my personality, I just don't feel as if I wanted to sit and make a bunch of phone calls all day, which is kind of ironic that now 20 some years later, that's what I do with Rithm is I sit at my desk and I do podcasts and I make phone calls, and everything is usually through Zoom or through a phone call. So I think everything has kind of come full circle for me. But I think that when it comes to inside versus outside sales, which I've been talking for a little bit, I believe this was your initial question. I think it really comes down to your comfort level. When you are talking to somebody on the phone, it is a little less intimidating for both parties, although you're the invisible stranger. And this is one of the things that I had a sit down with Chris Beal, the CEO of Connect and Sell, and he talked about the invisible stranger and how we've been programmed, you know, throughout life to not like the invisible stranger. And so if we were to meet in person, I see you walking up to me before we say hello. So there's a different comfort level. Whereas on the phone, you answer the phone, you don't know who it is, why they're calling, and what they're calling about. And so there's just an apprehension. And so if you're okay with that, if you're okay with starting on the inside sales part, and you're okay with just, it's a lot of failure. It's a lot of failure. It is a lot more repetitions than outside sales. And outside sales, you might have 10 to 20 calls in a day. But on the phone, I've heard that some of these companies can do dials up to 100, maybe 200. So it's just a lot more repetition. So it really just comes down to your personality. Do you like being out? Do you like meeting people in person? Or do you prefer kind of having more things more scripted, maybe more controlled in an environment like inside sales?
With outside sales, I mean, you were shut down for two years. I mean, we couldn't visit, and even now, travel and visiting is still up in the air. I mean, they're reducing the restrictions, but nevertheless, there's still a lot of companies that aren't back in the office. So how are isn't outside sales doing a lot of what inside sales people had to do anyway?
Yes, they are. And technology has definitely helped. I'll be honest, I had no idea what Zoom was until the pandemic happened. I don't think a lot of people did, especially in, excuse me, the outside sales world. And what's really changed is the need for going all in on technology. Technology, we've never been more interconnected. And so it's not just technology like Rithm, which I can talk about in a second, but it's utilizing Zoom. It's also utilizing FaceTime. It's utilizing the phone. I mean, the phone is one of the, and by the way, yeah, I've got swag everywhere. The phone is one of the greatest tools and resources that we have today that my dad and his generation of sales professionals didn't have.
Mhm.
You know, my dad would roll up, he'd have bags of quarters in his car because he'd have to use payphones. I mean, think about that. Like, we're being able to communicate from, you know, you're in Pennsylvania, I'm in North Carolina, very easily. You know, we can see each other, which is awesome. And we're recording this, and then this is going to be set up as a podcast that people can listen to on their phone, et cetera. And my dad, just the turn of the century, or the, you know, turn of the, you know, millennia, whatever you want to call that, was still using quarters.
Yeah.
You know, so it's pretty wild. And I think this is not slowing down. I think that what's going to happen in the future is outside sales professionals are going to start creating portals where they're going to have multi-prospect calls. And so instead of having just one person, you might have a webinar. And it's already happened on LinkedIn where people are having webinars, but I'm talking specifically of people that are experienced in outside sales. I think there's going to be webinars where interested parties across your territory can hop on the webinar, and you can multiply your efforts by having 6 to 10 prospects all on the call and having them collaborate about your product, your service, or your idea, while you have a chance to face answer those questions, as opposed to the traditional one-on-ones. And so going forward, it's going to be a hybrid. And I don't think that genie is ever going back in the bottle. Now, yes, there is still restrictions. A lot of companies are letting their sales professionals be out there on the road. There are some access issues. There were already starting to be access issues before the pandemic.
Well, yeah, because you can't go in, terror threats and a security environment. Yeah, 100%.
And so that genie is also not going back in the bottle. So it's going to be, you know, the next decade. And if you look at it through 2020, when the pandemic started, through 2030, I think outside sales is going to be a hybrid of being great with the phone, with phone calls, being great with emails and text messages, which I was horrible with. I didn't realize until about 2018 that I have to use exclamation points and emojis when communicating with my female prospects, because they convey, in text messaging, they convey excitement. When they send messages between their friends, they're always trying to convey their excitement for something. And I'd have some of my clients were like, Mike, I have to ask you a question. Why do you not use exclamation points in your text messages? Are you just not excited to text me? And I'm like, what do you mean? I was like, I don't understand. And they were like, you have to use, and I was like, really? And all the other, you know, I was in dermatology, and in Charlotte, it was a female dominated with physician assistants, nurse practitioners, and a lot more female DOs and MDs are entering the fray. And they all kind of looked at me like, oh, you didn't know that? Oh my gosh, we just thought you weren't excited to send us a message because, and I didn't realize this, you know, I didn't meet my wife till 2018. And she also kind of said the same thing. She said, you know, or was it 2017? Maybe it was 2017. But it was before I met my wife. And she said, oh, you didn't realize that? Like, yeah, you have to use emojis and you have to use punctuation. And so here I was just sending text messages out, and people must have thought I was, you know, kind of sitting there very monotone. And so, you know, there's been an evolution towards technology, and that is going to be even more so. And what's great about that is the ability to replicate yourself. Whereas I can have multiple sales conversations going on simultaneously. Whereas my dad's generation, it was one-on-one.
Yeah. So let's talk through that. I mean,
Okay.
So why not just do everything through inside sales?
Well, it's a great question. Some products you're going to be able to do that. And I believe those products may be more utilitarian. I know software is kind of viewed utilitarian. You know, it's a utility. It's nice. It's technical. And it's also something where, because it's digital, I think more digital products, people view them as being something that can be done from your home or on the phone. More physical, tangible products, products that need samples, especially in the medical and pharmaceutical world, face-to-face just gives you a level of connection that you can't get over the phone. And that's why, you know, when people started opening back up and they could see their family members, there's videos online of them crying, and because there's something about the human touch, you know, shaking somebody's hand. And I know that with COVID, you know, a lot of people have stopped doing that, but I mean, I still shake hands with everybody that I meet in person. And, you know, nobody that I've met has been wary or afraid to do so. And there's something about that, you know, being able to look somebody in the eyes when you're sitting across the table or you're grabbing a coffee and sharing a story. There's a higher level of intimacy as far as, you know, drawing that person closer, et cetera. And it's one of the reasons, I don't have the number in front of me. I saw a study a couple years ago where people that would meet over Zoom, you know, romantically, when they met in person, there was no spark. And it was like 40%. And it's kind of, you know, because you build this rapport online, you think everything's great because all you're seeing is the hits. And until you actually get in front of somebody and you start talking to them and you start communicating with them, that's really where you can dive deeper into the relationship, where your product or service is not looked as being utilitarian, but almost a necessity. And they're buying into you. They're not just buying into the product. And in my experience, I don't know if I'm right, but in my experience, I think that it's harder to build that level of either trust to where it's a necessity online. And if it is, point me into that direction because I want to learn how to do that.
Yeah. Well, let's go the other pathway, because oftentimes the reason that people won't take an outside salesperson and bring them into inside sales is because of how they do business development or prospecting. So how do you see business development changing in this environment?
Do you mean from
Prospecting net new?
Prospecting? Well, again, look at technology. I'll just take Rithm for an example. So if you go into Rithm, we have a prospecting tool. And what it does is it taps into Google. And so you can literally put in any prospect that you want, any type of name, dermatologist, chiropractor, dentist, it could even be electrician. And you put it into our search bar and it'll pull up every single person on the map and show you where they are. And then with one click of the button, you add them to your target list. And so instead of the days of, even my partner, when he started in cough and cold sales in the aught decade, they would hand him a phone book. Literally, they would mail phone books, local phone books, because they weren't as readily available in 2003, 2004, 2005. So they would buy from the city and they would mail phone books. And they would say, there you go, there's your list. And so now utilizing technology has never been easier in order to find prospects. Of course, you can also use LinkedIn, you know, LinkedIn Sales Navigator. There are a couple other products out there that you can scrape information. There's lists galore.
Right, but are people walking up? Are they doing cold knocking? Are they having to do the things of a BDR, SDR, and having to do the whole entire top of funnel work?
Are you asking about inside sales professionals?
No, I'm talking outside.
Outside. It depends. So again, a lot of my outside sales experience is in the medical pharma world. And I know dental and eye care are the same. Usually it is, you start a job, and if you're in dermatology, they send you a list of all the dermatologists, and that list is either people that have already used the product before or their prospects. And so they kind of push you out the door and they're like, just go visit them.
Yeah, and
so
that's
what
one
they
of
do is
the
they start,
challenge. I was just going to say, and that's one of the challenges that I think a lot of people are pushing back on with outside sales is it's all, I don't want to say all, but they used to call it the milk run, right? Hey, I'm going to go on a milk run here in this day, here in that day. And I'm curious are you doing mostly pharma still? Or are you doing also manufacturing? What's the group that's mostly leveraging this resource?
So right now it's in the medical pharmaceutical space. We do have some people in bev sales, but we really haven't marketed, because right now the beta group was all people that we knew. They were all friends in the industry and the network.
Mhm.
And a lot of my network is of the former medical, pharmaceutical sales, dental, eye care. And so really what Rithm is good for is any outside sales professional that has recurring meetings, which is going to be either with clients or prospects. If you're trying to earn business and you're driving in the car and you need to make at least 5 to 10 minimum calls a day. As far as you're trying to set appointments, you might have an appointment at 8, you might have an appointment at 10, you have an appointment at 11:30, and it's going to help you with organizing, structuring your day, and kind of filling those gaps where you can prospect. Using a map, and with outside sales, and this is one of the things that's different than inside sales, is using a map. Every outside sales rep has a territory, and there's a clearly defined border. And so within that territory, that is where you're going to try to pull business from. And so what we try to do is visualize that territory for the sales professional and make it easy that if you're new to a territory, new product, new job, you know exactly where your opportunity is in between some of those appointments that may be. It's a very difficult thing to do. Outside sales is very challenging because there's so many variables every single time you walk out the door, and every one of your actions has a ripple effect.
Yeah.
If you decide to leave your house 10 minutes later because you wanted to make coffee, you might run into traffic that you wouldn't have if you'd left 10 minutes earlier. And so what that does is that chain reaction starts a domino effect throughout the entire day. That's not really a challenge for the most part inside sales, because the repetition and the amounts of dials you can make are so much faster since you're not moving. But when you start throwing in the variable of distance, time, movement, getting into a car from location to location, it all of a sudden speeds up all the amount of variables and the changes that can happen.
Yeah. So your hypothesis is that you won't be able to build as strong of a relationship online as you can in person. So that's one reason that you would look to outside sales. The other reason that you didn't say, but I'll just toss this out there because
Sure.
it's fairly obvious, is that if you need eyeballs on a plant, if you need eyeballs on a particular physical environment to be able to understand it, then that might be a time that you have outside sales. I guess other than those two reasons, what if I'm the CFO?
Mm-hmm.
And I come up to you and say, Mike, listen, it's going to be a lot less expensive to get somebody on inside sales doing full cycle sales than what an outside salesperson is. I'm guessing. Why would a CFO choose to continue on an outside sales position other than maybe, hey, physical environment, you need to visit it, or if you believe that you can't build relationship through Zoom or online? And I'd love to see that study. That's interesting. I've not heard that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think it really does come down to the industry. I've worked for a couple of pharmaceutical companies that had inside sales, and then an outside sales rep took over the territory because the brands were expanding and the sales numbers. In fact, I did that one time. I took over a part of a territory that was covered by inside sales, and I 20x'd the prescriptions. And so in the medical, pharmaceutical space, dental, eye care, there is something about being in person. And
now,
maybe
let me push back on that just a little bit.
Okay.
Because it's curious, right? Because all of this language, Mike, has changed so much. Because in the manufacturing space, and it might have been true on the healthcare and medical pharma space as well, that a lot of it, whenever you said inside sales, a lot of it was order taking, customer service, and it wasn't necessarily full cycle sales.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where I think a lot of this is changing. And so what do you think you were doing differently? Because I think it's more than just a relationship. I think that's a part of it. So don't get me wrong. I'm not discounting that. But I think it's more than that. What do you think you were doing differently than that quote unquote inside salesperson, AKA probably customer success or customer service?
Yeah.
What were you doing differently that person wasn't, other than being in person and face to face?
Great question. And I think it goes back to human psychology. And I know that there are times where I've purchased products and I've purchased services, and maybe it wasn't the cheapest, and sometimes it wasn't the quote unquote industry leader, but I had a relationship with somebody at that company where I just knew they weren't going to let me down. And one of the things is by kind of acts of faith. And I think that, there inside sales professionals can do a lot of follow up, and they can do a lot of follow through. But when you see somebody show up to your business, for instance, I would go and be there right before they closed. If they called me and said, "Hey, I'm out of samples, can you make it today?" And they see the effort in person. And so it kind of, you start building up, as what I like to call a system of debits and credits. You start building up credits. And imagine if you were a consumer and there was a company out there that was willing to get your business so bad that they were willing to show up at your door and hand deliver the product to you. Now, there's another company that wants your business, but they just have somebody over the phone. We have been programmed, and I will give you the caveat that this can be changing. But definitely in the past, the person that was in front, it was, you kind of ingratiate yourself with your prospects and your clients. And I think it goes back to, it makes you feel special as a buyer, that they took time out of their day to show up at my door, show up at my office, deliver it in person. In fact, I used to hear that all the time, like, "Oh my gosh, you didn't have to drop by today." And I said, "Well, if it's important for you, it's important to me." And so I had to do this today. And you keep doing that over and over again. And, when people say, I think it's the most overused phrase, building a relationship. Well, what really is that? It's really
I'll give you my definition after
Sure.
yours.
Okay. The way I see it, and maybe this is through the lens of outside sales, but building a relationship is the other person that trusts you to take care of whatever they need as far as a solution, without adding any stress, or maybe, taking stress away from their day. And so from a business standpoint, and of course, obviously with personal, it is, it's a little different, but I feel like it is the ability to, connect with that other person, and that other person have a feeling that no matter what happens, you're going to make their life better, easier, more fulfilled.
Yeah. And I would say, I always get concerned whenever people say, "How do you sell?" "Oh, I sell on relationship." That oftentimes means that I have a ton of friends, a fat pipeline, and nothing closing, because I'm more about the relationship than being that trusted advocate or trusted advisor. And oftentimes, to have a true relationship, sometimes you need to push back and challenge people. And too often, people that are only relationship won't push back and truly help that person. But the way that you described it, Mike, I like that, because another way of saying what I think you're saying is, I always suggest that it's not about the relationship, it's about the trust factor. And you laid it out that if you do these things, you build up trust. And you've de-risked it because I've built trust. So I think that we're saying the same thing, just a little bit differently.
Absolutely. And I'll take it a step further. When you just talked, it spurred something in my mind. With surviving outside sales, and my partner, Justin, we have something called the sales advocacy method. And the goal is to create advocates. And it's not just to have associates. And so think about in your life, and everybody has done this. And as you age, you kind of lose associates. But, in my 20s, I knew thousands of people in Charlotte. Okay. Because they were friends of friends, or, I was a former bartender. So I knew a lot of people that were regulars, and then their friends would come in, but they weren't friends. I call them associates, friends of friends. And, I'd go out to the bars and I'd see a lot of people and, "Hey, how are you doing?" They didn't hardly know anything about me, and I hardly didn't know anything about them. And I think a lot of times in sales, especially in outside sales, those quote unquote associates are what people say, "Oh, I have relationships." And that's not deep. That's 1 inch deep and 1,000 feet wide. And that is not the recipe for success in sales. You'd rather be more narrow, but super deep. You would rather have advocates. And so it's funny that, when we talk to people in sales, and I haven't hired anybody in a while, but Justin used to be a manager, and he used to hire people. And he used to ask people, if you called up today and you were in a bind, how many people would go to bat for you without questioning? That's a question that needs to be asked, as opposed to, oh, how many relationships do you have?
Yeah.
Oh, I've got thousands. Again, it goes back to, what is your definition of a relationship? And I think that term is so broadly used. And so, I like I said, as I get older, I'm less concerned with associates and more building stronger relationships where people know they can count on me, and I know that I can count on them.
Yeah. Now, what would you say if somebody's, new to outside sales?
Mhm.
What would you say the most important thing that an outside salesperson has to do to be successful?
Wow, that is there's a lot, but I think the first thing is, if you're new to outside sales, I would try to find a mentor or somebody that can give you some guidance, because you're going to be drinking through a fire hose. There's going to be a lot of in between the lines knowledge that you're just not going to have. And you're not going to know, there's the way you stand, the way you walk into a prospect's office, where you park in the parking lot, how you dress, what you should do before, during, and after a call. There's so much information to teach. And having a mentor, somebody that's gone through it, somebody that you want to follow in their footsteps, is the great place to start. And then realize it is a marathon, it is not a sprint. And so, don't worry about having great one-liners. Worry about trying to learn as much as you can at the beginning and be a sponge. I have a phrase that I can't remember where I got it from. I did not coin it, so I'm not going to try to say I owned it, but it was a great conversation that I heard on a podcast. The guy said, go 10 questions deep. Go 10 questions deep and just keep asking questions. Be curious and try to learn everything you can from everyone, and check your ego at the door. Because as we started this call, there was a point in my time where my ego was probably bigger than my body. I'm 6'4", about 260 pounds with broad shoulders. And my ego was massive, because I turned around territories that they said couldn't be turned around. So I thought I knew everything. And then what happened was I started expanding I widened my gaze to the rest of the sales world. And Bryan, I was like, oh my gosh, I know nothing.
Yeah.
I absolutely know nothing. And I realized that I was at the bottom of the ladder, and I thought I was at the top. I wasn't even close to the top. And so I realized that, you know what, mea culpa. I was egotistical, and I was like, you know what, I just have to check my ego at the door, and kind of humble myself and realize, okay. And what I did was, personally in my business world, in my life, I deconstructed everything, and I tore my entire house down, and I bulldozed it. And we talk about in the Surviving Outside Sales is, be a sales builder, start over from scratch, build a nice solid foundation, and then build the house back up. Because basically, when you have an ego, you're sitting on a house of cards, and it's going to fall down one day. And so, so I know I threw a lot at you, Bryan, but I gave you about 5 or 6 things to do. But I think searching for training, finding a mentor, and then realizing this is a decades long process, and you need to be a student of sales, not just somebody who clocks in and clocks out, but read sales books, listen to sales podcasts, ask for mentors, ask other professionals, network within your industry. Don't spend your time watching movies and Netflix and all that stuff. Try to better yourself. You're going to accelerate yourself ahead of your competitors and your peers if you do the little things consistently every single day to get smarter, to get better, and working on your craft. You're going to need to role play 10,000 times before you feel ultimately confident in almost any sales call. It takes time. So those are just a couple of the ideas there, Bryan.
Yeah, love it. All right, so let's go on the flip side. What's the biggest mistake that you see outside salespeople doing?
I think it's not realizing what their number one resource is, and that's time. And I'll give you an example. There's at least in the pharmaceutical medical space, there's a joke. If you go to any Starbucks in America between the hours of 8 and 10, there's at least 1 or 2 medical or pharmaceutical sales reps there getting coffee. Not for the office, but for themselves. And it's one of the things because it is so monotonous calling on the same people over and over and over and over again that people fall into bad habits, and people fall into ruts, and not realizing that time is the most valuable asset we have. Everybody has the same amount of time, but not everybody utilizes that time wisely. And I'll give you an example. So my partner was working today, and he basically got all of his work done by noon. And so the afternoon now is his ability to do prospecting, but he got all of his work done before noon. He got started the minute he got up, dropped the kids off at daycare, 7:45, 8 o'clock. He started his day, went all the way through noon. Now the afternoon is going to be spent prospecting. It's going to be connecting. It's going to be networking with his advocates, seeing where his network can help him. Whereas I know some sales reps that they think, well, my job's from 8 to 5. Let me stretch it out. I got to get some calls in the morning, got to get some calls in the afternoon. And not realizing that the faster, more efficient way of making your calls, getting through your day, and then building that pipeline later. Justin and when I was in sales, we're so far ahead of everybody else because of realizing that time was the best and the biggest asset we had, and we maximize that time. And that's one of the things we built into Rithm was there's a big time component, because we have a philosophy. There is a right time and a wrong time to see a prospect. And you can find out in the medical and pharmaceutical space is actually quite easy. You ask the office, what's the best time to come see Dr. So-and-so? And they'll tell you, well, he sees reps from 10 to whatever. Is there any other time? Well, he also does lunches. Does he do anything after hours? Does he do dinner programs? Will he do breakfasts? Well, you know what? He will do a breakfast for anybody who's willing to do so. Bingo. Yeah. Willing to do so, so that's the time to go see the doctor, is when others aren't willing to do that. And so, again, it's a process of just learning those other things. But I think that time is wasted. During the week, there's 8 to 5, there's 5 days. And I think so much time in between, especially because outside sales professionals drive, I feel like so much time is wasted. I can't tell you how many times where I've pulled into a parking lot and I'll see a rep either on the phone or I can see they're scrolling on their phone. I park, I walk into the office, and then 2 minutes later, they walk in behind me and they're like, oh, I didn't even know you were here. Yep. I just got here. And then they're waiting while I'm back there talking to the physician. And then I leave and I'm on to my next call where they should have beaten me in the door, but they were on social media, what have you. So
wasting time. Got it. Now, how about the biggest business hack in trying to identify good outside salespeople to hire? So if my go-to-market strategy is leveraging outside salespeople, what should I spot or look for in a good outside sales rep?
Great question. So one of the things is the background of training. And so I don't think if somebody hasn't had training that it's a disqualifier. It really depends on what your organization is willing to do for the individual. If you're hiring for outside sales professionals that are new to outside sales, and you're going to kind of run them through a 2 to 3 week boot camp, or sales boot camp, like Enterprise did, where it's very intense, and then all you're looking for is a different set of skills that I'll come back to. Now, if you're a more advanced company, you might be looking for something different. And so the characteristics for outside sales professionals, very competitive. I'm super competitive. I'm not as competitive as I used to be. I used to be almost deathly competitive. Like I hated to lose at anything. It didn't matter if it was a game of tiddlywinks or, like just how many times I could put heads by flipping a coin. I was uber competitive. I wanted to win everything. I wanted to compete. I wanted to beat my numbers. And then I realized I had to calm down a little bit because there was an intensity that I don't think I don't think that the intensity was healthy. Being a former athlete, it's funny. I played a sport where you fail 7 out of 10 times and you're considered great. And yet I still hated to strike out. I hated to get out. I hated to lose. Competitiveness. I don't think, the phrase that's the phrase that I hear, especially hiring managers say that's the worst, is when people say they're a people person. It goes back to what you said earlier. Sales is sometimes a battle, and sometimes you have to say uncomfortable things in order to negotiate or close a deal. And you don't want to be a people person or a people pleaser, because you just have to have very thick skin. And so somebody who knows how to fail, somebody who has failed, overcome adversity, makes a great outside sales professional. And so
that gritty, thick-skinned. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Now, how about resources that you might recommend? Books, podcasts, guides, somebody that can really brush up and take advantage of all that's out there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, besides the Talent Sales and Scale podcast, Surviving Outside Sales podcast, which I host, is another one, but also Market Dominance Guys podcast. Chris Beal and Corey Frank is another fantastic one. And then Love Selling, Hate Sales, Josh Wagner. And then if you're trying to get in, Dream Job with Danielle Cobo is a fantastic one. Those are some of the podcasts that I listen to on a daily and weekly basis, and absolutely love. Books, I mentioned Malcolm Gladwell, Outliers. Any of his books are fantastic. And those aren't necessarily business books, but they are human psychology. And I think that sales has a lot of psychology. There's also Crossing the Chasm. I like the Grant Cardone books. I think they're very rah-rah, and they kind of get you. But you know what? You need that sometimes. You need that rah-rah. You need those platitudes. But the Heath brothers, Made to Stick, Contagious, Jonah Berger, Chris Voss, Never Split the Difference, Negotiate Like Your Life Depends on It, is one of my favorite books. Yep. It's one of my favorite books, and so, and then one is a personal friend of mine bought a book, Leveling Up Your Life, Ken Brokaw. I think it talks more about the not work-life balance, but how you can get everything you want in your life and leveling up your business and your life by just having a daily plan. So
there you go. Well, you got a whole library there. And yeah, I was on Josh's podcast. I think that might have dropped this week. So you're going to be sharing that. So check that out. Yeah. Now, what do you see future holding? What's coming down the pike for outside sales that has you going, or, hey, this is going to be pretty cool?
Well, I think a lot of it is going to be hypothetical, but I do see, and what we are planning for at Rithm is maybe 5 or 6 years down the road, sales professionals in outside sales are going to have CRMs and their technology in the car. Like, every new car right now has these massive tablets that have big screens. And so I can see calls going through that. I can see Zooms going through that as they're driving. Of course, there's going to be some, legality and challenges, but I see the integration of technology into the actual vehicles to where you can get in the car and you can just basically say call notes. And then you can say your call notes as you're starting to leave the parking lot. You want to talk about efficiency. And everything's going to be connected between your cell phone, your car, and it's all going to be integrated. And I think cars are going to have more Wi-Fi, so you'll have more capabilities to where, as an outside sales professional, your car was your mobile office, but it's going to be your mobile sales office, where you can hold Zoom meetings, presentations in your automobile. Technologies like Rithm, where you've got the traditional CRMs, where CRMs are great, the Salesforces and the Vivas in the medical space. Which is great, but we see those as more data warehouses, where you throw your call notes in there, your information, and it stores it. What Rithm tries to do is the sales optimization tool is we take that same information and we send you information back through a schedule, through an optimized route, through letting you know that these people are important and you haven't seen them in a certain number of days. And so we're trying to help you optimize your sales, not just collect all the data and have it sit there. I think there's going to be a massive boom with integration of technology in outside sales, where we've already got the tablets, we've got the phones, we've got the infrastructure is already there. I think that there's going to be possible, more video calls than there is. I know Zoom and FaceTime started to really take off during the pandemic. I think that's going to continue even further. And as I mentioned, it's going to be where you're going to have multi-client or multi-prospect calls on the same call, and kind of creating these kind of roundtable discussions. Whereas before in the past, you usually had to get everybody together at a dinner, and you had to work out people's schedules. And sometimes people at the last minute couldn't make it. And so, you plan to have X number of people, and then 2 or 3 pulled out. Still was a great event because you got hours to talk to them. But I think leveraging technology and outside sales is going to be the future, and the organizations and the sales professionals that do so correctly are going to be the ones standing at the top.
Yeah, wholly agree, that integration. So, hey, I really appreciate it, Mike. So who should reach out to you? How should they do it? And why should people reach out to you?
Well, you can reach out to me in several different ways, but you can reach out to me if you're in outside sales, if you're looking to start, if you feel like you're stuck, if you want to get out of what you're doing, you want to transition to a new role. I've shared my entrepreneur story. So besides starting a technology company and a podcast, my wife and I also purchased 2 franchises in the health and wellness space because it's something we're passionate about. And so I'm going to be a small business owner as opposed to just the technology, but I'll be a small business owner with a brick and mortar store here in Charlotte, North Carolina, very soon, possibly Q1 of next year. And so, if you want to be an entrepreneur and you want to find out that there's more, again, talking about the wide world of sales, there's so much out there that if you just focus on what your industry has to offer, you're going to miss a lot of possible opportunities. So if anybody wants to just chat with me, after the podcast, I have people that reach out to me. I have done some phone calls with individuals who just want to know more. So you can reach out to me, Mike at survivingoutsidesales.com. It is spelled how it sounds, survivingoutsidesales.com. If you want to check out Rithm, we do have a $1 free $1 trial for the first month. You can go to rithmai.com, rithmai.com, or you can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. Any of those 3 routes are the easiest way to go.
There you go. So summing up here, fail, make sure that you're learning as you're failing, find your training, create your path, deconstruct how you're doing things, always improve that process that you're deconstructing, repeat it and perfect it. And then lastly, consistent action, practice that consistent action, and you'll find success. So with that, Mike, hey, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. As always, comment, like, share this out with your friends. Learning for learning's sake is pointless. Let's learn for application's sake. We really appreciate you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Bryan.